Okay, let's go over how to set up the game and how to eliminate our rules and what we can do. So, um, can anyone tell me what they first did, how they set up their diagram to begin with? What did you first do?
So what I did was I drew out 7 lines and then numbered them 1 through 7.
Perfect. Yeah, this is a basic ordering game. This is about as basic as an ordering game can get, where you're just ordering the variables within a line, a sequential line. So you will see this kind of game, I'm going to say like 99, if not 100% on all of your tests. You're going to have at least one of these kinds of games. So get used to it, get comfortable with it, is going to show up on your test. Okay, good. What did you do for the first rule?
So for that one, since it said that T cannot be mentioned in chapter 1, I drew the T over the 1 and then like the little slash just to know that it can't be there.
Perfect. So yeah, this rule is a little, kind of wish I didn't have to start with this rule because it doesn't really show how to make the world properly. Every time we go into a rule, I want you to think to yourself, where does that leave my variable to be placed? Because when we make worlds, we're looking more so for where can the variable be placed rather than where can the variable not be placed. However, with this rule, if you can see, there are 6 spots that T could technically go just given this first rule. So it's much easier, or I guess I should say it's much more efficient to write out that T can't go in 1 rather than creating 6 different scenarios where T can go so we can eliminate the rule. So essentially, T not going in 1, slashing it out above 1, perfectly fine. And maybe, hopefully, and I know it happens, there is another rule that might restrict further where T can go. So it could be something along the lines of T has to be directly next to S, or T has to be X amount of spaces away from another variable. That restricts where T can go more. And then we can look into and see, okay, well, maybe there's less worlds or less spots where T can go, and we can start building our worlds from there. So first rule, we've basically eliminated it. We don't have to think about it anymore because we've got it placed on our diagram in some way that we know that T can't go there. So let's go into rule number 2. It says T must be mentioned before W, and there must be exactly 2 chapters separating the mention of T from the mention of W. Does anyone want to tell me what they did with this rule?
Forgive me, I'm like refreshing myself on ordering, although it is the very simple task for a lot, it's not for me. So don't think I'm not paying attention. I'm learning. So I wish I was able to tell you, but I'm like drawing blanks. So
And that's totally fine, because even though you may be drawing blanks now, it's a great way for your brain to remember to learn it, because, or I guess to remember it, because this kind of rule pops up a lot in these games, in these ordering games specifically. So if you can remember the frustration and just remembering, like, I don't even know where to begin with this rule, you're gonna remember it on another game when it pops up again. You're gonna go, oh, I drew it like this way, or this is how I attacked that rule. I'm gonna do the same thing in this other game. So be patient with yourself. Does anyone want to give it a shot before I kind of go into the rule and diagram it myself?
I can try.
Okay.
I just wrote T, line, W. And I'm not sure if this is accurate, but I just put T in the second spot,
Mm-hmm.
and then W 3 spots away.
Like on my 5th spot.
Yeah, in that spot. But what I do know is sometimes I get confused Because I would do that, and then as I'm going through the things, I'm like, you know, like, oh, I already have them in these spots. What do you mean I have to change them again? You know, so I don't know if this is the correct way to do it.
Gotcha. So you're on the right path, but it sounds like you stopped right before you kind of dove any further into it, and you can go further into it, but you were on the right path. You just stopped really short. So just to reiterate this rule, T must be mentioned before W. So if we just broke it down like that, because this rule is kind of two rules in one, it's got a comma and an and. So if it's too much to take it at one, take it as bit by bit. So the first part just says T has to be before W. Well, if you're looking at it on your sequential line, T just has to be to the left of W. Yeah, to the left of W. But this rule specifies that it has to be exactly 2 spaces apart from W. And that's where we get our 2 spaces up here. Those 2 spaces are going to remind us that they have to be separated in that spaced apart. So they can't be any closer or any further because it says exactly 2. Sometimes you're going to get a rule that says at least 2 or must be a spot at least away from W or something like that. This one specifies 2, which is why we have to have 2. Does anyone have questions about like the rule itself before I go into making the different diagrams? Okay. So you were totally right. T, oh, you put it on 2. T can go on 2, and then W would then go on 5 because it's 2 spots away, but you stopped short. So what I want you to do is when a rule has 2 variables with it, pick one variable and figure out, okay, where can T go on my line? Because you're right, T could go on 2, but there's other spots that T could go. And that's what world is meant to do, is to eliminate the rule entirely. So if we can put T on all the spots that it can go, we don't have to worry about that rule anymore. And we don't run into the problem of, I've only put it in one spot, but yet this rule or this question says that if T is on 4, but yet I don't have that. So if T is on 2 and W is on 5, what is another place that T can go in?
T could be in 3 and W could be in 4, 5, 6.
And do you see any other spot that T can go in?
4 and W in 7.
Yeah. Is there any other spot that T and W can go in?
I don't think so.
No, there's not. That's as far over as we can go. So a really kind of, the way that I look at it is I'm just shuffling, maybe, if I can pick up my box. I'm just shuffling this T down the line until I've hit a dead end, basically. Think of it like that, because that's going to prevent you from, I don't know if anyone else does this, but I've done it before when I was studying, is picking up my block and moving it all together. So then moving it T to 6 and going, oh, I don't have any spot for W, but I can move it variable by variable, and that's what we need to be doing. So now this kind of in turn also eliminates rule 1. We've placed all the spots where T and W can go in, so I don't have to rule or worry about this rule anymore. I can just completely eliminate it from my mind, my list, my whatever. I can just block it out. I don't have to revisit it anymore because those are the only 3 spots where T and W can go in. Does everyone understand that? Do we have questions about that? Okay. All right, let's move on to rule 3, 4, and 5. We'll just kind of not speed through them, but I want to kind of go through them before we go into the building world for a specific reason. So rule 3, who can tell me how they would diagram rule 3 or what they would do with rule 3?
Would you right away just start placing S and Z like in the graphs that you already have?
So I would if it was a bit more restrictive. And by that I mean if S and Z are not adjacent, if they hate each other, if they can't be near each other.
Mhm.
And I revert back to how we built T and W. Okay, where can S go? Where can Z go? If you look at my world 1, just to kind of, for a good way to look at it, where could S go?
It could go in 1,
Where
in
else?
2, in 2,
Where else?
in 3,
Where else?
in 4.
You get my point, is S can go everywhere pretty much.
Yes.
Same with Z, so long as it's not touching S.
Yes. Okay.
So my rule of thumb is if it's making anything more than 4 worlds, hold off on making the world, write it off to the side and revisit it, because more than likely there is a more restrictive rule in the game, meaning there's a rule that's going to restrict where S and Z can go. Kind of like what we saw with T and W. When we started, T couldn't go in 1. T had 6 spots it could go in. And before we wrote out 6 different worlds, we went into a new rule, and that restricted where T could go significantly, because T now can't go in 5, 6, and 7. So S and Z, a lot of different spots. And an easy way to see that is, where can S go? Where can Z go? Let's hold off on that, because that's a lot of worlds. And the other thing that we have to also think about is all 3 of these worlds are completely different from one another, right? T is in a different spot here, T is in a different spot here, and so forth. Same with W. So what we have to do every time we go into a new rule is we have to go, world 1, where can S go? Rule 2, where can S go? We have to treat them like individual worlds. So rather than it being, or at face value, it looks like S can go in 7 different spots. It's not creating 7 different worlds. In fact, it's probably creating, 30 different worlds? Am I doing that right? Probably doing math wrong. But it's creating a lot more, because we have to look at it in world 1, and then world 2, and world 3. Too many worlds. Not efficient use of our time. So let's hold off on it. How could
diagram S and Z not being able to be mentioned adjacent to each other?
Yeah, so I was just going to get into that. Does anyone have any idea how did they write it to make themselves understand that S and Z cannot be adjacent? Does anyone have any idea?
Sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
So I was gonna say, I play around with it, but sometimes I'll either do like S and then ... Z, but I guess it would be better to do S, Z, and then like a box around them, and then cross it out, just so I know that they can't touch.
So yeah, that'll segue into my other point. I don't care how you write your rule, so long as it makes sense to you. So both of these are perfectly fine ways of representing them. The only thing I would add is, does it specify if S has to go before Z?
No, that was going to be my question too.
Yeah, so what we can do is we can put an arc over them to note that they have to flip-flop it, or don't have to flip-flop, but they can flip-flop. We don't care who comes first. We don't care who comes last. It doesn't specify that. If it mattered, it would specify that, like our T and W rule. So for sake of space and clarity, I'm going to write my rule S, Z, hate each other, but they flip-flop. So again, I don't care how you write your rule, because you're the one interpreting your rule. Test makers aren't interpreting your rule. The proctor's not interpreting your rule. You're the one interpreting your rule. So
it cannot be SZ or ZS.
Yes.
Okay.
Sometimes if I'm having like a brain dead day, rather than writing my arc, I'll write it again underneath it and flip them, so I have a more visual reminder that they don't have to go in that order.
I like the arc better because I wrote that out, but it takes, I don't know, a few more seconds.
Yeah, and I mean,
it's important.
It doesn't take up a whole lot of time that I would say, oh yeah, always do an arc, but it's good to at least get used to it, because it can help you save some time. So okay, cool, we're gonna move on. We'll revisit that rule And we'll look forward to eliminating that. But let's go into rule number 4, which says W and X cannot be mentioned in adjacent chapters. How did anyone do this rule?
Same thing, S and Z.
Oh, yeah. Because essentially it's the exact same rule, just different variables.
Mhm.
So again, I don't care how you do it, so long as it makes sense to you. I'm gonna write it like that. Can't really give myself. Don't be quick to learn that I don't give myself a whole lot of space. I've been tutoring for like almost a year, and I have yet to learn how to give myself space. Oh, okay. Does anyone have questions on that rule? Any interpretation problems, anything like that? Yeah, we kind of already touched on it with S and Z. It's the exact same rule, just different variables. So that being said, this rule is a little bit different because we do know where W is, right?
Yes.
So technically, if we wanted to, we could go in and fill in where X can go, because just looking at our first world, how many spots could X go in our first world?
3?
1. Yeah, 1, 2.
Yeah, 3. 1, 3, and 7. We could go into that way and figure out that, but then also we gotta look at world 2. How many places could X go in?
It can go in the 1 spot, the 2 spot, or the 4 spot.
Yeah. So another 3 spots that X could go in. So I'm kind of liking this rule so far. What about 3? Where could X go?
1, 2, 3, and 5.
Yeah. So, I mean, it falls within our guidelines of within each world, it's creating 4 or less worlds. So we could start off with that rule. But I honestly like our last rule a little bit better. So let's go into our last rule and revisit our 4th rule. I should also caveat this with, you can attack the rules in whatever order you want, but you're looking for what is the most restrictive rule. What is creating the least amount of possibilities? Hence our T and W, only 3 spots that could go in. So that's what we're kind of looking for. So looking at our 5th rule, who wrote, or what, how would you write this one out?
I did a U and an X in the little box and then the arrow. So we know it could be either or.
Yeah, because it doesn't specify who has to go first, right?
Mm-mm.
And in ordering games, it's kind of important if it's specifying it or not. So this is great. A really good rule to start with is boxed rules. So technically our T and W rule was kind of a boxed rule because we couldn't separate them apart anymore or push them together anymore. It was technically a box one. But we already put that in there, so we don't have to worry about that one anymore. But U and X, we can't pull those apart. Whereas in our other 2 rules, 3 and 4, we can pull W and X apart as far apart as possible. That's why it creates more options than our U and X, because they have to be in this box together, right? So it's always a really good place to start when you have boxed rules. It's usually a good indicator to start making worlds with that one. So let's start with world number 5. Looking at our first world and only our first world for right now, because we have to go through each of them individually. If we're looking at our first world, where could our W and our U and our X box go?
3 and 4.
Could go in 3 and 4. Where else can it go?
6 and 7.
Yeah. Now I'm writing them little because I wanted to revisit them, but let you guys finish your thought process. So if it's in 3 and 4, we kind of care about the order of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does the order of them have to be?
X, U.
U.
Yeah, because X hates W. And still in world number 4, we still care about the order of them. What does our order have to be?
U, X.
Yes. So that's why we're creating our copy and creating a duplicate world, is because when T is in 2 and W is in 5, U and X have 2 places that they can go in. And so that's creating 2 different possibilities. So we're going to create an exact duplicate. We're going to create world 4, and we're going to place X and U in one of our spots and X and U in our other spot. Once we kind of flush through the second and third world, we'll have every spot where U and X can go in. We don't have to worry about that rule anymore. It's really nice. So, does anyone have questions about how we did world 1 and split it into world 4?
Does it always have to be a duplicate of the first one?
Yes. Well, whatever world you're working on. So, for example, when we go into 2, U and X have 2 spots they can go in. We'll duplicate worlds 2. So whatever world you're working on, if you've noticed that there's 2, 3, 4 spots that a variable could go in, you're going to duplicate it that number of times. So then you can have the diagram, the graph, to place it in those spots. Does that make sense?
Kind of, sort of for me. Kind of threw me right there, but I think it might register on a second time.
Sometimes you need to see it more times than not. Okay. And I should also specify, we're building on top of our worlds of what we've already done. So rather than creating a blank world, I think I made too many numbers, too little numbers. Oh well. Rather than creating a whole blank world and going, okay, U and X can go here, U and X can go here, we have to build upon of what we've already done, because our worlds or our rules are talking about the worlds are, oh my gosh, I can't speak today. Our questions are asking questions when our rules are integrated with one another. That's the whole point of games, is integrating your rules so you can answer your questions. So we basically, the analogy I kind of put to it is, you're building like a brick house, like the 3 little pigs, like you're building on top of what you've already built. And that's also why we can't move our variables around once we've placed them. That's the whole point of creating the worlds. So when we look at world 1, we cannot move X and W or X and U into 6 and 7 because we've created the world down here. I mean, you could move them if you wanted to, but that's kind of more work than you doing that already. So yeah, you can't pull out your bricks when you have 3 layers on top of them. It's kind of hard to do. Okay.
Would you say this is a stopping point where you can now start looking at answer choices and start process of eliminating? Or like, would you say once you start getting stronger at gaming, there's a certain amount of letter placements and rules assessed to be able to say, okay, now it's time for me to now make an educated, guess on this and keep it moving for time purposes? Or how
So
I hope my makes sense.
Key word in your question was educated guesses. I don't make educated guesses. I make this is the answer guess. I don't even make guesses. I say this is the answer. So I fully flesh out my world. I go through until I can eliminate all the rules, or at least to the point where it kind of comes with practice, the point where I feel comfortable stopping, where I can maybe mentally move around some variables. That's when I stop and I go into the questions, because yes, it takes some time to set up our diagram. Honestly, it takes me maybe 5-6 minutes to set up a diagram, sometimes longer on the harder ones. But my questions take me 30 seconds, because when it says, what could be true if T is in 2, I can say X is in 3 or X is in 7. That's my answer choice. So it doesn't take me any time. I don't make educated guesses. And that's what I want to happen for you guys. We don't have to make educated guesses. This is a section where you can get 23 out of 23 on the section, 100% all the time. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Hi, I have a quick question. Why specifically are you only putting U and X in 1 and 4 and not putting it, in 2 and 3?
Where are you? Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. The world numbers. I was looking at like my spot
Oh,
number.
sorry.
Partially, it's because we haven't moved on to world 2 and 3. We will totally get to it. We just stopped to answer some questions. But that's
Okay.
we started with 1, created world 4. We'll go into 2 now and potentially create another one. World 3, create another one. That's kind of how I recommend doing it, so you can make sure that you're organized and you're making all the worlds that you need to be making. So we're not going 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going 1, what worlds do I have to build? 2, what worlds do I have to build? 3, so on and so on.
Okay, so you're not really writing like a bunch of tiny letters around each blank space. You'll just go on to like another line. Okay,
It takes you
thank you.
all of 3-4 seconds to create another line, which is why I do world. It takes me 2 seconds to create another world, and I can concretely put in my variable and know that that's where it's going to go. I don't have to do as much mental gymnastics then on in the questions.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's go on to world 2. In world 2, we're still going to focus on our block, our U and X block. In world 2, where T is in 3 and W is in 6, where can my block go?
In 1 and 2.
Could go in 1 and 2. Where else could it go?
In 4 and 5.
Yeah, so because I have 2 different places where U and X can go, I'm going to create that copy. And to reiterate what we had said earlier, it has to be an exact copy of 2. That's the world we're working on. It's messed up W. So when it's in 1 and 2, do we care about the order of them?
No.
Mm-mm. You can do this one of 2 ways. You can do something like this and do your arc like our rule is over here. I personally prefer to do something like this. Sometimes I need the reminder that they can flip-flop and a visual that X could still go in 1. Sometimes that's just a good visual. And in my 5th world, do we care about the order of our U and X?
Yes.
Yes.
So what does it have to be?
XU.
Yeah, because it hates W. Awesome. Any questions about that? Cool. Now we're going to go on to world 3. So then we can fully flesh out this rule and not have to worry about X and W, or sorry, X and U ever again. So in world 3, where could I put my block?
Under 1 and 2, 2 and 3, and then 5 and 6.
Yeah. Sometimes people forget or their mind doesn't let them see that we can just scoot it down one by one. We don't have to pick it up and move it. Like we can use that second spot if that makes sense. So we have it in 1 and 2, 2 and 3, and 5 and 6. And this is getting messy. We'll work with it. In my 3rd world, do I care about the order of U and X?
No.
Nope. So I don't care how you represent that with your arc or slashes like me. I'm going to do something like that because we don't care. What about when they're in spots 2 and 3? Do we care about the order of U and X?
No.
No, because no one hates T except for W. And I wrote T as I said it. Didn't mean to do that. And what about my last world when it's in 5 and 6? Do I care about the order?
Yes.
What does it have to be then?
X and then U.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have questions on the duplication of world 3? I felt like that kind of went a little fast. I just want to make sure I'm not going too fast for anyone.
Did you put a box around X and U in world 7 to like remind you that that is like a permanent?
I put it around there so I remembered which spots we were working on. If I was
Okay.
doing this like I was just doing it as a game, or if I was working with someone who had done worlds before, I probably wouldn't have done that. It's just kind of visual reminder, like this is where I'm putting my variables. You can certainly box them if you want to. Doesn't do anything. Doesn't do any harm. I mean, that's how it is in our rule. So if you want to box them, that's totally fine. Is everyone ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so now the beauty of it, we don't have to worry about rule 5 anymore, right? Because we've placed U and X in every single one of our worlds, kind of. We've put it in the area where it can go in. And we don't have to worry about rule 4 anymore because we kind of already did that. With rule 5, W and X have no possibility of touching each other anymore because we've placed X and W, and we don't have any repeat variables. So we can completely eliminate that rule. Don't have to think about it anymore. Yay. Last rule to eliminate is our S and Z rule, which is going to be fairly quick because we've pretty much placed all of our variables except S and Z and our floater R. So in our first world, let's go through it world by world and eliminate that rule and place S and Z so we don't have to think about it anymore. So in our first world, where could S and Z go?
In the first one, and then 6 or 7.
Yeah, so essentially what you just said was S and Z, one of them has to go here, right? In that first spot. Because if you notice here, 6 and 7 are in a block. So there's no way that R could be in one, S and Z would be touching each other and they hate each other. One of them's gonna have to be separated, kind of like a 2-year-old arguing with another 2-year-old. You gotta separate them, they hate each other. So one of our other S and Z's you said was going to flip-flop between 6 and 7 with what variable?
R.
Yeah, our last variable has not been talked about in any of our rules. It's considered a floater. Anywhere I put R, it's not going to violate the game. R can go anywhere at this point. But because all of my other variables have been placed, R is restricted to 6 and 7 in this world. Does anyone have any questions on how we put that rule into our first world? Because that's our first full world. This is our first completed world. We can use this diagram in our questions, which is nice. So I put a check mark to notate that that's a completed world. Okay, let's go into world number 2. How can I eliminate my S and Z rule?
Put them under 4 and then have a little arrow. We can do the R in 5. And then S and Z in 7.
Yeah, it kind of like flip-flopped with our first world, which is kind of interesting to see patterns like that. S and Z can't be in that blank block that we had. So one of them's gonna have to go off to the side. The other one's gonna flip-flop with our floater, which is R. We don't care about where R is. Anyone have questions about that?
No questions.
Yes. Oh, did you say you had a question or no question?
No questions for me.
Okay, let's go on to world number 3. How can we eliminate our S and Z rule?
In slot 3,
One of them is going to have to go in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where does the other one go? Or could go?
well, R has to go in 5. So the other one has to go in 6. S and Z has to be in 6.
Do
So you
they
do
have?
arrow-
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just asked if you do the arrow for
Yeah.
6.
So we don't necessarily care which spot R and our other S and Z variables go in, because it doesn't specify if R has to be before one of them, or if S and Z can't touch T or W or something like that. So they can actually flip-flop. So our arc can tell us that they're going to flip-flop with one another. Because even when S and Z is in 5, T is still separating them. We still have our mediator in between the two. So they're still separated enough that we don't have to force one of them to go in another spot. Any questions on that one?
Mm-mm.
Okay. What about my 4th world? Where can S and Z go? How can we eliminate it?
1 or 3.
Where else could I put an S and Z?
4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you do the R with the arrow.
Yeah.
Okay, this is easy.
Yeah, once you kind of get to the end of it, they just kind of fall into place. And it becomes
Makes sense.
Yes. It becomes a little bit quicker than making the worlds that we had done.
Yes, because I usually would just get stuck, as I said, like after I put, okay, 1 doesn't go in, T doesn't go in 1, and then what, But
Yeah.
this makes sense.
So my perspective of it is, rather than thinking about where variables can't go, I'm going to think about where variables could go. Because that's what our questions are asking us. Where could this happen? Why, what must happen in this situation? What could happen if this, I'm looking at what my questions are geared towards. And it makes, in my opinion, a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. What about world 5? How can I eliminate my S and Z rule?
S and Z will go in the first one. R will go in the second with the arrow. And then S and Z goes in the 7th.
Yeah. What about 6? Where can I split my S and Z up?
1.
One's gonna have to go in 1. What about our other one?
After T with the R and arrow.
Yeah. Because we don't care about what order they go in, so long as S and Z are split up. What about my last world? 7.
S and Z, 1. Then R and S or Z.
Yeah. It's a little bit different than our other ones, but it's forced S and Z to go in 1 and 3. One of them has to go there. R has to go in 2, so we can split them up. Now comes the fun and exciting part, the part that I love when I tutor people, is we've created every single possible diagram for this game, which means we don't have to look at the rules anymore. We've completely eliminated it. And when we go into our questions, we can just look at our diagrams and make these answers come like this, because we know what happens when T is in 2. We know what happens or what could happen when R is in 7. We don't have to test out answer choices anymore. So, does anyone have any questions on the setup before we go into the actual questions?
I do. Is there a set amount of worlds as like these numbers, or every question will be like a different amount possibilities?
So the game itself, like this game, for example, these are all the worlds that can happen. We've created 7 because we've kind of taken these shortcuts with like our S and Z, we've shortcut that. These flip-flops, we've shortcut that. Technically, this world is 3 worlds in one because S and Z can go in 2 different places and R can flip-flop with our 6th spot, basically. We've shortcut it and we've condensed it down into this one world. So all of these 7 worlds can be expanded a little bit more, but I don't think it's necessary to do so, and it's not time efficient to do so, honestly. When we go into the questions, though, we can use all of these worlds. However, if it gives us a question saying, if X is in 3, I can only use the worlds where X is in 3. So I could only use this first world. I could only use this 6th world. Those are the only 2 worlds I could use for that question because it's restricting me to when X is in 3.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Does that make sense? I think it'll become a little more clear once we get into the questions.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I have such a tiny screen. I need to get a bigger one. Okay. We're going to skip our list question because I want to go into the actual like nitty-gritty questions before we run out of time so I can actually show you how to use your diagrams. So, like I said, I'm hiding the rules because we don't need the rules anymore. All we need is our diagram. Move that over a little bit. So we're going to go into question 7, which says, if X is mentioned in chapter 1, which one of the following could be true? I'm going to give you like a minute to try to answer this question, and then we'll go over it. All right, does anyone have an answer choice that they like, or maybe even 2 answer choices that they're stuck between?
I like 1. I think E is the correct answer.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, did someone say 1, just to make sure? We'll go through all of them anyways. Okay, so
I
what
have B.
did you say, B?
Yes.
Okay, we'll go through all of them.
Mhm.
Okay, so first things first, this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. This is an if question. It's restricting me to when it's only X is in 1. So what we have to do over here is we can't use all of these diagrams now. Because if you've seen our first diagram, X has no possibility of being in 1. So our first objective is, which worlds can we have X in 1?
2 and 3.
Yeah. What a lot of students sometimes get confused with or struggle with is when we have flip-flopping variables. Well, we can't move our variables around. If we're flip-flopping, we can conform it to fit this question because it is a possibility that X could be 1. We can't have X in 1, which would then force U to be in 2 because we have to pick one of the 2. So we're only between those 2 worlds. So we can only use those 2 worlds when answering our question. So now we have to ask what could be true. When we go into answer choice A, can I make it within those 2 worlds that R is in spot 3?
No.
No, I don't have it possible. Spot 3 is T or my S and Z. Wrong answer. What about B? Can I make it so R is in chapter 7?
Yes.
Nope.
Who said yes?
Me.
Where?
Wait, I'm confused.
So reset your mind. Sometimes blank out your mind.
Oh. I
Did it
see it.
clarify it? Did resetting your mind clarify it?
Mhm.
Were you looking at this first one?
I surely was.
So on here, it's a little hard for me because I don't have my lines. But if you use line paper, it becomes a lot easier. Or if you struggle really bad with organization and keeping your stuff clean, I recommend graph paper too. There's no restriction on what kind of paper you use. So you can use graph paper on your actual test.
Okay.
So, but do you see how like R, we don't have that as a possibility here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So B is wrong. What about C? Can I make it so S is in 2?
Nope.
No, S could never be in 2.
Yeah,
In the-
within those two worlds. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you think about it, if X and U have to touch one another and X is in 1, U's going to have to be in 2. So no way can S be in 2. What about D? Can I make it so W is in 5?
No.
No. 5 is either going to be R or my S and Z again. And last but not least, E, can I make it so Z is in number 3?
Yes. In the second world.
Yeah, I can make it happen right here. Because
Yeah, I got it right.
And did you, I should say this, did it take a lot of time for us to do that? Did it become super hard? We didn't have to test out any of our answer choices. We just had to look at what we had already done and go, yeah, I can make that happen right here.
Yeah, I think it came very quickly in that minute you gave us. I found the answer.
Yes.
The proper diagramming. The problem is I relied heavily on your diagramming because mine is so scribble at this point.
It takes practice. It takes a lot of practice to kind of get yourself to answer or ask yourself the right questions. I'm guiding you. I'm asking you the questions that need to be asked. So eventually you will come to the point where you're either going to hear me in your head or you're going to like naturally already do it. Like Anna's been coming to my classes for God knows
Like
how long.
months. Yeah, like months.
And I'm sure you hear me in your head all the time. So, does anyone have questions on question number 7?
Mm-mm.
Okay. It's 6 o'clock. You can stick around.